You can't speak to me like
The
that.
first sound was not his voice. It was a silver spoon tapping crystal, a small bright strike that cut the room like a thin blade. The dining hall glowed with soft light. Velvet drapes dulled the city's noise. Laughter rose and fell like polite waves. At the center table sat the billionaire CEO, flanked by lawyers and investors, a contract folder shining like polished armor. He leaned back in his chair and tasted a dessert he did not need. The spoon shimmered in his hand. Across the table, a young black waitress stepped into view, steady, carrying a tray of sparkling water and coffee with careful grace. He saw her as a delay, not a person. His eyes narrowed and the spoon tapped the rim again. Conversation slowed, then paused. The air tightened. She moved closer, posture straight. The tray balanced like a small world she refused to drop. The room carried two metals now, the bright spoon in his fingers and the dull steel beneath her palm. Wealth and work, noise and quiet. Power and poise, remove her, he said, as if clearing dust from a sleeve. His tone did not rise. He did not need volume. The words slid out with cool certainty wrapped in habit. I don't want her in my line of sight. The phrase floated above the white tablecloth like a stain. The maître d' froze. A few guests looked at their plates, studying crumbs as if they were maps. The general counsel reached for his water and missed the glass by an inch. The pianist at the back, sensing a draft of silence, touched a single key and then lifted his hands from the instrument. The waitress stopped. She had learned to let noise pass through her like wind through reeds. But this was not simple wind. This was a command meant to erase. She set one foot down, then the other, anchoring herself. The tray hovered steady, its thin edge pressing a line into her skin. The room watched the line. The CEO's spoon caught a halo from the chandelier, bright and cold. He rolled it between finger and thumb, a small scepter for a small kingdom. Somewhere a camera lens clicked shut. Sir? The maitre d' tried, voice mild. Perhaps. The CEO didn't look at him. Now, one word hard as glass. He lifted his chin toward the waitress as if pointing to a misplaced chair. Two security staff shifted their weight, waiting for the cue that would make a person into a problem, and a problem into an exit. The investors behind him pretended to compare notes. A woman in a silver dress hid her phone beneath the napkin on her lap, eyes low, recording by instinct. The waitress breathed once, and the tray did not shake. She saw the spoon. She saw the folder. She saw how he would not see her. A draft carried a faint scent of lemon oil from the polished floor, a clean smell in a dirty moment. She lifted her eyes and held them level with his. It was not a challenge. It was a refusal to disappear. Around them, silence stacked like plates. The CEO's mouth pressed thin. He turned the spoon over and over, metal flashing. A tiny mirror that reflected everything but himself. A glass at the edge of her tray gave a small ring as the ice settled. The sound ran through the hush like a signal. The CEO smiled without warmth, confident that the room would obey him because it always had. He nodded once at security, a king's gesture, casual and final. Chairs creaked as people shifted, hearts racing though faces stayed smooth. The maitre d' took a step he did not want to take. The waitress did not move. The spoon tapped crystal again. The tray stayed level. And in the breath before anyone acted, the room hung between two metals, silver and steel, waiting to learn which would be stronger. A single glass trembled, its rim singing a faint note in the hush. The guests had heard the command. Some lowered their eyes, pretending to study menus that no longer mattered. Others shifted in their seats, caught between loyalty to wealth and the weight of conscience. Silence spread across the long table like spilled ink, staining every conversation that had been flowing only moments before. The waitress stood still, her tray balanced with the precision of a practiced hand. She did not flinch, her quiet presence pressed against the arrogance that had just filled the room. She carried no weapon, no shield, only her dignity. The investors watched. One man cleared his throat but said nothing. His fingers tightened around a wine glass and the liquid inside quivered with him, reflecting the mood of the hall. That glass became the measure of the night, a fragile vessel filled with richness. Yet one wrong movement could shatter it. The maitre d' lingered in place, eyes darting between the billionaire and the waitress. His training demanded obedience. His conscience demanded restraint. The contrast was sharp, polished shoes against trembling legs, fine etiquette against raw human fear. At the far end of the table, a woman in pearls pressed her lips tight. She had once been humiliated in a similar fashion, though her wealth had shielded her from lasting harm. Now she felt heat rise in her chest, not from anger alone but from recognition. She glanced at the waitress and saw a reflection of strength she herself had lacked in that long-past moment. Phones were hidden under napkins, screens glowing faintly. Guests who would not speak aloud let their cameras witness for them. In the silence, truth found another path. The CEO, spoon still in hand, leaned back as if the outcome were already sealed. His smirk told the room that silence was his ally, that no one dared to break it. Yet beneath the surface, unease cracked the veneer. Every clink of cutlery, every cough in the corner carried the weight of suppressed judgment. The waitress inhaled slowly. The tray did not shake. Her stillness spoke louder than any protest. In a hall built for spectacle, her refusal to crumble became the spectacle. Around her, the witnesses divided. Some chose the comfort of silence, shielding themselves with lowered eyes. Others burned inside, their restraint thin as glass. That glass, trembling in the man's hand, mirrored the truth of the moment. Silence could hold for only so long before it spilled, and the room waited, heavy with the question, who would break first? The tray in her hand was heavy, but not heavier than the life she carried behind her eyes. She was not born into velvet halls or shining chandeliers. Her world had been built in narrow kitchens, crowded buses, and long nights where every coin mattered. Each morning she rose before the sun, leaving her children with her mother, promising them she would return with what little she could gather. The uniform she wore was not just fabric. It was a pledge, to keep food on the table, to keep hope alive. Tucked inside her apron pocket was a small, worn notebook. Its cover bent at the corners, its pages crowded with numbers. Shifts written in pencil, bills inked in red, rent due dates, grocery lists, the cost of medicine. A ledger of survival. To others, it was paper. To her, it was memory. Every line carried the weight of sacrifice. Every sum a reminder that dignity had no price tag, but always demanded payment. She had worked through insults before, through careless words and sharp glances that tried to shrink her. Yet each time she stood taller. Her dignity was not given to her by anyone at a polished table. It was carved out of struggle, guarded by the discipline of endurance. As she faced the billionaire, that same notebook pressed against her side like a shield. It did not shine like silver. It bore no crest of power, but its quiet weight reminded her of every hour spent scrubbing dishes, every late walk home through dark streets, every promise whispered to her children that tomorrow would be better. The room saw only a waitress with a tray. They did not see the nights she skipped her own meal so her family could eat. They did not see the dreams she folded away so others could sleep in peace. Her life was written not in speeches but in resilience. And now, all of it stood with her in that moment, refusing to bend to arrogance. Across the table, the CEO stirred his spoon, certain of his command. He held numbers in his contract worth $200 million. She held numbers in her notebook worth survival. His wealth was vast but fragile, dependent on appearances. Her strength was quiet but unshakable, forged in places where appearances meant nothing. The contrast was stark. His silver spoon glinting under chandeliers, her notebook faded and small. Yet one carried ego and the other carried truth. Her hand did not shake. Her breath stayed even. Dignity once rooted does not yield to commands. It may bend under hardship, but it does not break. In that hall of luxury, her silence spoke louder than his power. And though no one else yet dared to move, the balance of the night had already shifted. Not by contracts, not by wealth, but by the quiet force of a woman holding both a tray and her ground. The contract folder lay on the polished table like a crown made of paper, heavy with numbers, fragile with trust. Around it, the room pulsed with wealth and expectation. Investors leaned in, lawyers shuffled notes, and the air carried the quiet weight of $200 million waiting to be sealed. The billionaire CEO sat at the head, shoulders square, spoon abandoned now for sharper tools, words and authority. He believed the deal was his already, as certain as the glass of wine beside him. At first, the meeting moved with practiced ease. Balance sheets were reviewed. Growth projections were praised. His voice, smooth and commanding, steered the conversation like a tide. But beneath the polished surface, a new current began to stir. The CEO interrupted one partner mid-sentence, brushing aside a concern with a wave of his hand. He mocked another for overcomplicating simple math. Laughter followed, but it was thin, forced, as though guests laughed not at humor but at obligation. The waitress stood silently in the background, her presence ignored but her dignity unshaken. To her, the contract looked like a wall of numbers. To the investors, it began to look like a wall of arrogance. The partners had seen power before, but they also understood fragility. Deals did not survive on ego. They survived on trust. And trust, once cracked, spread like glass under pressure. One investor tapped a pen against his notebook, eyes narrowing. Another adjusted her pearls, hiding unease behind polished manners. The billionaire either did not see or chose not to. He pressed harder, his voice carrying pride, his sentences leaving no room for others to breathe. The waitress shifted slightly, tray steady, watching the same arrogance that had tried to erase her now spill into business. The contrast was sharp, a billionaire speaking as if the world bent to his will, and investors beginning to wonder if their fortunes should bend with it. The contract folder, closed for now, reflected the chandelier light. Its shine could not hide what was beneath: risks, signatures, and a bargain that required balance. The CEO reached out, tapping the folder with a manicured finger, as though its contents were already chained to him. But that tap carried a hollow echo. It was not the sound of victory. It was the sound of pressure building in silence. Questions grew sharper. One partner asked about rising costs. The CEO cut him off with a smirk. Another mentioned reputation risk. He brushed it away with a dismissive laugh. The laughter did not spread. The room began to cool. The same silence that had followed his command to remove the waitress now returned. But this time it was not respect, it was doubt. The waitress, still holding her place, noticed a small detail others missed. A lawyer's hand resting on the folder but not opening it, fingers pressing as if to keep it closed. That folder had the weight of millions, but in that moment it seemed fragile, like paper set too close to flame. The billionaire leaned back, confident he had won, certain the signatures would follow, but cracks had already formed. They were not loud. They did not announce themselves. They spread quietly, across the glances of uneasy partners, across the trembling edge of a wine glass, across the unspoken realization that arrogance, unchecked, could sink more than dignity. It could sink a deal. And as the night moved forward, the contract stayed unopened, its silence heavier than any number written inside. The tray touched the table like a gavel striking wood. For hours, power had moved one way, downward from the billionaire's seat to everyone else's silence. But now, with one simple motion, the current shifted. The waitress lowered her tray, steady and deliberate, and in that gesture the balance of the evening cracked. The cups on the tray clinked faintly, a sound far sharper than applause. The CEO leaned forward, eyes cold, expecting obedience. His command had been clear. Remove yourself. Vanish. He waited for her to fold, to retreat, to confirm what he believed. That dignity could be ordered away. But she did not move. She straightened her shoulders, placed both hands lightly on the tray, and spoke, not loudly, not trembling, but with a calmness that struck deeper than any raised voice. "Sir," she said, "I serve this room, not your pride. I will not walk away because you told me to." The sentence landed like a stone dropped in still water. Silence rippled outward. Every guest felt the weight of those words. Simple, clear, unshaken. The kind of words no wealth could buy, no contract could erase. The CEO's smirk faltered, but he masked it quickly with laughter that rang false. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice rising with the echo of entitlement. "Yes," she replied, her tone steady, "and that is why this moment matters." A gasp slipped from somewhere down the table. Eyes widened, hands froze in mid-motion. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not in private, certainly not in public, and never with such restraint. Her refusal was not rebellion for its own sake. It was dignity refusing to kneel. The tray became more than a serving tool. It became a boundary. By setting it down, she declared that she would no longer carry the weight of his arrogance. Silver spoons and glass cups rested together, powerless as the real strength revealed itself in the quiet firmness of her stand. For the investors, the contrast was unmistakable. The billionaire, with all his money and contracts, showed only anger and fragility. The waitress, with nothing but her resolve, revealed composure and clarity. Power had shifted, not in volume, but in truth. The CEO tried to reclaim the room. He snapped his fingers at security, but their steps faltered. They had heard her words too. They saw the cameras glowing beneath napkins, recording everything. Removing her now would not erase the insult. It would carve it deeper. The air thickened with tension. The chandelier above seemed to dim, as if light itself held its breath. She did not flinch. Her hands rested calmly by her sides, no longer carrying, no longer yielding. Her refusal was not an outburst. It was a mirror. It showed the room who he was, and who she refused to stop being. And in that moment, though no deal was signed, though no papers were moved, everyone knew something irreversible had happened. The billionaire had given an order. She had given a truth. One would fade. The other would remain. The first ripple was not a voice. It was light, faint, blue, and trembling, spilling from a phone screen hidden beneath a napkin. The silence that had followed the waitress's refusal was heavy, but silence cannot hold forever. Guests shifted, their unease turning into action. Fingers tapped screens. Eyes darted. The billionaire still sat high in his chair, unaware that control was slipping through the room like water through open hands. At the far corner, a guest lifted his phone, angling it discreetly. The camera caught the contrast, a billionaire gripping his silver spoon like a weapon, and a waitress standing tall, hands empty yet stronger. That glow of the screen, small and unshaken, became the witness that no silence could erase. Across the table, a journalist adjusted her glasses and lowered her fork. She slid a pen across her notepad with careful precision. Her notes were sharp, clinical. Phrases like demeaning order and public refusal. She knew this story was larger than a merger. This was not just business, it was character exposed under light too bright to hide. Murmurs began, soft at first. A man leaned toward his neighbor, whispering, "Did you hear what she said?" A woman nearby replied. Everyone heard. Their words carried not in volume but in truth. The command to erase her had flipped into a mirror that revealed him. The CEO tried to laugh, tried to speak as though the moment was trivial, but each attempt only cracked his image further. The guests no longer leaned toward him. They leaned away. His confidence, once a magnet, now repelled. The more he spoke, the more they listened to her silence instead. The waitress stood steady, her refusal still echoing without a single extra word. She did not need to add more. The witnesses were now speaking for her. Every glance, every note, every recording turned the weight of humiliation back onto the man who had tried to inflict it. The glow of phones spread in the dim light like quiet stars, each one catching a fragment of truth. It was no longer one tray against one spoon. It was a room of witnesses against a man's arrogance, and in that moment, the ripple became a tide. The billionaire had entered the evening to secure a fortune, but now the story being written was not about money. It was about dignity, and how quickly power can collapse when the world begins to watch. The folder that once promised fortune now sat untouched, pushed to the side like discarded paper. For the billionaire CEO, the evening had been designed to crown him with triumph. $200 million waited in black ink, locked behind signatures he believed already his. Yet arrogance has a way of turning crowns into chains, and tonight the links grew visible. It began with whispers that were no longer contained to the table. The videos, caught in the soft glow of hidden phones, were already climbing into digital networks faster than any contract clause could stop. Within minutes, screens outside the room flickered with the story. CEO humiliates waitress at merger dinner. Headlines were not printed yet, but reputations moved quicker than ink. Inside the hall, the investors' faces tightened. Their pens no longer hovered near the folder. Their hands, once eager, now folded across their chests. The journalist's notes had grown sharper, her eyes cutting toward the waitress as though recording history in real time. The CEO sensed the shift but misread it. He believed more force would steady the deal. He raised his voice, boasting about quarterly returns, mocking his rivals, laughing off questions as though they were childish interruptions. Yet each word built the wall higher between himself and those who had come to trust him. The arrogance that once passed as confidence now sounded like noise. One partner whispered to another, "This won't survive the morning." A quiet nod followed. Contracts require numbers, yes, but more than that, they require faces untarnished by shame. None of them were willing to stake their billions on a man whose pride was cracking in public. The waitress still stood in her corner, tray set down, presence unshaken. She did not speak again. She did not need to. Her silence was now amplified by every witness, by every phone glowing in the dark, by every investor's glance that refused to meet the CEO's eyes. Then came the moment that sealed it. The lead negotiator, a man whose signature held the key to the deal, slid the folder slightly away from him. Not opened, not signed, just pushed aside. The motion was small, but its meaning was clear. The weight of 200 million had turned lighter than paper. The CEO's laughter stumbled. His spoon clattered onto the plate. For the first time that evening, his voice faltered. The power he believed immovable had shifted in silence, and he could not command it back. By the time the pianist resumed playing, soft notes meant to fill the uneasy air, the deal was already dead. The investors had made their choice without raising their voices. They would not walk out in anger. They would walk out in quiet calculation, knowing that reputation is more fragile than contracts, and trust once broken cannot be restored with numbers. The untouched folder remained at the center of the polished table, a monument to what could have been, and a warning of what arrogance destroys. And as the billionaire stared at it, hands clenched, the truth became impossible to ignore. Dignity had outlasted wealth, and one woman's refusal had undone $200 million with nothing more than silence and resolve. The night ended not with applause, but with headlines. By morning, the videos had traveled farther than the deal ever could. Clips of the command, the refusal, and the silence that followed spread across phones, news feeds, and television screens. The billionaire CEO, once praised for vision and boldness, was now framed by words no wealth could erase. Arrogant, cruel, unfit. Inside his company, the board gathered in urgent meetings. Numbers flashed across screens, stock prices dipping, partnerships pulling away, clients demanding answers. But behind every figure stood the same shadow. One waitress standing firm. Executives spoke in careful tones, avoiding blame, but their eyes carried accusation. The empire he built was no longer judged by contracts. It was judged by character, and character had failed in public view. Reporters surrounded him outside his office tower. "Do you regret your words?" one shouted. Cameras clicked like hammers. He forced a smile, but it cracked under the pressure. Each step he took seemed smaller than the one before. A man once towering now reduced by his own command. His name, once tied to success, had become a warning. Meanwhile, the waitress returned to her routine. She rose early, tied her apron, and stepped into work with the same quiet resolve she always had. But now people noticed her differently. Colleagues greeted her with respect. Guests paused longer when she approached, some whispering her name, others simply nodding with gratitude. She had not sought attention, yet attention had found her. Her apron, folded neatly at the end of each shift, carried new meaning. To her, it was still a uniform of duty. To others, it became a badge of strength, a symbol that dignity can stand even in the face of wealth and power. What was once ordinary cloth now carried the story of resistance that had rippled far beyond the dining hall. Letters began to arrive at the restaurant. Some handwritten, some typed, all carrying the same message: gratitude. Strangers wrote of courage, of justice, of how her silence had spoken louder than power. One letter from a young girl read simply, "Thank you for showing me I don't have to bow when I am right." The contrast was sharp. The billionaire sat in boardrooms, fighting for the survival of his image. She stood in kitchens serving with grace, her dignity untouched. He held wealth but could not hold trust. She held little but had gained respect. No money could buy. The aftermath was not measured in contracts lost or headlines written. It was measured in what remained when arrogance fell and truth endured. And in that measure, the waitress stood taller than the man who once tried to erase her. The scale had tipped long before the contracts were counted. What collapsed That night was not just a deal, it was the illusion that arrogance could shield truth. The billionaire had entered the dining hall believing his power was unshakable, his wealth untouchable. Yet in the quiet space between his command and her refusal, a balance shifted that no lawyer or accountant could measure. Justice did not arrive through gavels or judges. It came through silence, through a tray set firmly on a table, through words spoken with calm resolve. The courtroom of that night was filled not with juries but with witnesses, ordinary people who saw a line drawn and knew which side dignity stood on. The waitress did not seek victory, yet victory sought her. She left with no fortune, no headlines of her own, only the strength of having refused to bend. But that strength rippled outward, showing others that even the smallest act of defiance against arrogance could weigh heavier than millions. The billionaire left with everything he once thought mattered: money, buildings, titles, but stripped of what he needed most: respect. His fortune sat in banks, but his character was bankrupt in the eyes of the world. The scale had balanced itself, not by punishment but by exposure. In the ledger of life, numbers fade. Deals collapse. Paper burns. But dignity once defended endures. It becomes a record no scandal can erase, no power can buy. That night proved a simple truth. Arrogance may shine for a moment, but dignity stands for a lifetime. And somewhere, unseen but certain, the balance scale of justice tipped, forever in favor of dignity.